It is decision time for crypto. We have analysts like Raoul Pal talking about the banana zone where all crypto assets shoot up, but we also have the fact that we will not be getting interest rate cuts at least until September, and Trump is not happy about this. In today's video, we'll be talking about the recent Bitcoin price action, what is the key barrier that we need to break for us to consider moving higher, and we'll also be going over the recent news. If you enjoy the content, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Let's jump right into the video. So the first thing we're going to look at, as per usual, is the Bitcoin price action, and you can see that we are simply just consolidating. Nothing has really changed since yesterday's video. We came back down, almost retested 107.2K as support, which is the pivotal area that I've been keeping my eyes on. Now, right here, at the time of recording this video, we are back above the range, which is ultimately bullish. However, we are below the previous all-time high, which was set around inauguration. And so, what you need to consider here is, if we start closing above this range and above the previous all-time high, things are starting to look very, very positive. But we cannot neglect the fact that between $109,000 to $110,000 for Bitcoin is a critical level. The reason being, between $109,000 to $110K is heavy resistance, and we really need spot bids to be able to sustain this price action. So what I'm looking at here is actually a potential rejection, as we've been talking about on the channel. However, if we reclaim some key levels, as we've been discussing, then at that point, I would be considering a Bitcoin long, targeting the liquidity to the upside. One thing I need you to pay attention to is indeed the dollar. Now, the dollar here is in a critical support level, which we could expect some kind of bounce. And typically when the dollar performs well, risk assets do not perform that well, as they are inversely correlated. So right here on the dollar chart, we can see that over the past couple months, we've had nothing but red candles. In fact, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 red candles in a row. And if I zoom out here, we can see that we are at a pretty pivotal level, which we've held support at and resistance several times before. So if the dollar were to go ahead and bounce from these levels, then at that point, we can likely expect Bitcoin to have a further correction back inside this range, which we've been covering on the channel at length. Now, some of you have been asking about how this range is actually drawn and if it matters based on how you're going to draw it, but ultimately it still stands the same depending on which exchanges you're using. So what you want to look at here is at least a confirmation above the previous all-time high to be fully sure that you should be going long. And then if we can break this level over here, which we experienced resistance at that point, that's when we get the liquidity to the highs. But right now, I'm operating very cautiously, and even in my short position, which we talked about in yesterday's video, I'm only risking 1% of my crypto portfolio because this really is decision time. Now, I don't think that we're going to be making an aggressive all-time high, as I've been discussing on the channel. I do think we will likely just continue to chop around, and we will have a moment to accumulate Bitcoin back below $100,000. And at that point, hopefully in August, when we do get that drop, that's when I will be dollar cost averaging into altcoins. Now, I also wanted to touch on Raoul Pal's thesis here, which is indeed the banana zone. No one believed it in 2013, no one believed it in 2017, and no one believed it in 2021. So, is no one believing it in 2025, and is Bitcoin going to $200,000? So first of all, I don't think that Bitcoin will be hitting $200,000 this cycle. I do think we can likely find a top between 130 to 160K. That has been my base case for a while. However, there's a couple of things that Raoul Pal has been talking about here that I don't necessarily agree with. A lot of people have been asking him about the banana zone. When are we going to get it? So the phase 1 of the correction was between January to April, and he called the low in April. Cool, we had that low, and on the channel, we actually bought a lot of Bitcoin right around that 74K bottom, and we also bought some Ethereum below $1,600. The M2 chart is at an acceleration point. Rates are coming down. Now, this part is simply not true because, as we can see, a lot of people were expecting rate cuts in July. Then we got the data, and now there's 95% chance that we don't get any rate cuts. And then if we look into September, you would think maybe we for sure get rate cuts then, but you can see that yes, there's a higher probability, but there is still a 34% chance that we don't get rate cuts. What happens if we don't get rate cuts in September and inflation remains to be sticky? This is something you need to consider. Now, ultimately, I do think that we will have another expansionary phase of this market near the end of the summer after we put in that low. That has been my thesis for a while, and I will be sticking to it along with, as you know, the summer chop thesis. So let's see how things play out. 109 to 110K is a very critical zone. If we can flip that as support, at that point, I'm definitely closing my short and I will be sitting patiently for a reclaim to enter a long and then go ahead and target the all-time highs. Now, as I said, aggressive all-time high, in my opinion, will likely not happen. However, if we were to get support at these current levels and grab the liquidity to the upside, there is always a chance that we can wick above. But I don't think we would be holding these levels as support, for example, $115,000. I do think the expansionary phase, which will happen after August, in my opinion, I will make sure to keep you updated if that changes, would then see us hold above these levels. And this is where we can start talking about $120,000, $130,000, $150,000 Bitcoin. But you know that the bulk of this move is already over if you've been investing since the bear market, right around $16,000 to $20,000. Now, at that point, I didn't have a YouTube channel, and I'm really looking forward to, in the next bear market, telling you exactly when I accumulate Bitcoin. But the highest risk-adjusted returns, if Bitcoin really is to break out and altcoins are to follow, would be in altcoins. And as I've said several times, I do think we will be having some kind of altcoin season, but not quite yet. This summer chop continues and Bitcoin dominance will likely continue to increase. Something else I wanted to address here, based on what Raoul Pal was saying, is the discussion for altcoin season. Now, you know, one of my favorite metrics to look at as it pertains to altcoin season is ETH against Bitcoin. Now, this upper line is the Fed's balance sheet, and right below here we have ETH Bitcoin currently holding on support, which was set back in 2019. Now, as we've been discussing and following on the channel very, very closely, this is the bull market support band, which we're expecting a little bit of resistance at. If I had to guess, I think that ETH Bitcoin will likely move lower as Bitcoin dominance continues to increase and maybe form a little bit of a higher low before blasting off after summer, and this is when we can have a proper altcoin season. Right now, this is my base case, especially with restrictive monetary policy. As we can see, we are still in quantitative tightening according to the Fed's balance sheet. Now, all we really need here is for this to start flattening out before we can consider that altcoins may perform better than Bitcoin. And this is what I'm tracking, and I will make sure to keep you updated on the channel. The next thing I want to show you here is the fact that Trump continues to be fed up with Jerome Powell. It seems like every single week he leaves a comment like this saying that Fed Chair Powell should be resigning immediately. And on top of usually insulting the guy, he comes out and says Powell should cut interest rates right now on Truth Social. Let's hear what he had to say.
He's facing accusations of lying to Congress, which is a potential crime about the opulence.
Well, he should resign immediately. We should get somebody in there that's going to lower interest rates.
Do you want congressional
Why don't you call for his resignation?
Do you want congressional Republicans to investigate and
It's okay
pursue?
with me. I think he's terrible. I think, look, we're paying, I call him Too Late. T-O-O, Too Late, like Too Tall Jones for the Dallas Cowboys. Too Late. He's always late. But he wasn't late with Biden before the election. He was cutting him like crazy. It didn't help too much, did it? But he was cutting him like crazy before the election with Kamala and Biden. He was trying to get them in, I guess. I don't know. He was recommended by somebody that worked for me.
So you can see he just keeps on complaining about how Powell is too late, but ultimately he's just trying to keep inflation under control. Now his term ends very soon, I believe in 2026, and so he doesn't want to be remembered as the Fed chair that let inflation get under control by simply continuing to cut rates. So we'll have to see how this develops, but right now, as I showed you earlier, there's not going to be any rate cuts at this point in time in July, and in September, yes, we have that possibility, but the percentage of potential no rate cuts is continuing to creep up over here, so keep your eyes on this. Next thing I wanted to show you, right now the S&P 500 is experiencing a little bit of resistance right around these levels, but ultimately we did set that new all-time high. Bitcoin setting its all-time high before the S&P 500. Now, a lot of people were actually asking about this. Isn't Bitcoin going to follow the S&P 500 in setting a new all-time high? But one would argue that Bitcoin's all-time high was actually leading the S&P 500, and now that the S&P 500 set its new all-time high, perhaps with the dollar bouncing, this is the time where we could see some kind of correction for the S&P 500 and also for Bitcoin. The levels that I'm looking at as it pertains to trading Bitcoin are the same. If we can break above $109,000 to $110,000, in particular this zone over here, then I do think that Bitcoin could see further upside targeting the liquidity to the high. However, there's also a strong likelihood here that we get a sharp correction if we continue to see resistance right around these levels. And if I go on the 1 hour time frame just to show you exactly what I'm looking at here, we can see that today we set that high right around 109.2K. Then we got a pretty big move down to low $108,000, another pretty big move up, and now it seems like we're not able to reclaim this high. The key level that you want to reclaim here is the previous all-time high, which is this purple line here set around Inauguration Day. If we don't, ultimately the target for my most recent short position would be at the bare minimum 107.2K, and then if we break that level down to $105,000. So if we zoom out here, that would put us well and truly back into the middle of this summer chop range. And I know that a lot of you hate when I discuss this, but ultimately this range will likely continue to play out whether or not we sweep the highs. I don't think that we're going to get a proper breakout this summer, so make sure you're patient, and if you're trading, manage your risk accordingly. That reminds me, if you want to know my exact trade setups, you have the first link in my description down below, which brings you to my free Telegram community, and all you have to do is message me the word signals to be able to join that group. And we also have the second link in my description down below, which brings you directly to Bluffin. And I use this exchange for most of my trades. You can earn some pretty insane bonuses, depositing $2,000, and you can earn $300 back for free completely just for trading as you normally would. And the last thing that I want to go over as we wrap up this video, as we normally do, the liquidation heat map, and we can see that there's a lot of liquidity on both sides here, but there are more and more longs continuing to pile into the market. Bitcoin drops a little bit, and then everyone is starting to pile into longs, and then we get another little pump, and now Bitcoin looks like it's rolling over again. So let's see what happens, because on the Bitcoin exchange liquidation map, over the 30-day period, there is still way more longs on the market than shorts. We're talking over $5 billion worth of longs more than shorts. And so let's see. Right now we are in the middle of this range. A lot of liquidity to the upside, a lot of liquidity to the downside, which is of course the nature of the summer chop range. Back to the Bitcoin chart before we wrap up this video. As we can see here, basically $109,000 is acting as resistance, and we got a pretty substantial drop from targeting that high. So are we gonna hold above this ultimate range as support and then move on higher? Or are we going to move lower? You know my stance. I still think that we're going to find our way back within this range before any kind of big move. And that sums up today's quick video. Trump is still fed up with Raoul Pal not cutting rates, wants him to resign immediately, and we have Raoul Pal talking about his banana zone. Now, I know a lot of people will be fed up if this banana zone doesn't go ahead and play out, but lucky for him, I do think it will play out to some extent, but maybe not as extreme as a $200,000 Bitcoin. I also think that we will be having some kind of altcoin season, despite what I've been talking about on the channel before. But it's time to start preparing yourself to buy the potential low that will happen near the end of the summer. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, as I always say, but based on what I'm looking at on the charts, I do think that we will have a better opportunity to buy Bitcoin and buy some altcoins at lower valuations as they continue to bleed against Bitcoin in this summer chop, and Bitcoin dominance continues to increase. If you enjoy the content, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video.